When people study with me to learn to do what I do as a leader coach catalyst, there's one critical fundamental idea that I need them to know up front. We spend hours on it to make sure they've got it, and then months making sure that they can apply it to really change the world, transform the world for the people around them. And I want you to know it. So in this video, I'm going to teach it to you in an abbreviated form. So strap in and prepare to change the world. Hi, it's David with the next installment in this leadership library for you, that person who can see a catalyst, who can see a very different world as possible, and you are committed to bring it to life. And these videos help you build the skills to actually do that. So let me start by introducing this framework with you by sharing an experience that I had with one of my very first clients. Let's call them Acme Company. Acme was a fantastic consulting firm who specialized in making cultural change or creating cultural change for very large organizations, thousands of people at a time. And they had a really effective and unique way of doing it because they were trained as actors and storytellers. So their approach to cultural change was very different than the people who came to it from sort of the traditional MBA perspective. And I'm not knocking the MBA, I have one, but their version of it was very unique and therefore quite effective. And they had a goal. They wanted to grow their business rapidly because it was so successful. Not only did they want to benefit from the growth, but mostly they knew it was working so well that they wanted to have other companies benefit as well. But they had a problem. For 3 years in a row, they'd been trying to grow that business, but it had remained completely flat. And that's when they called me to say, can you help us figure out why we can't grow? We know we're doing well, but we don't know what it takes or why we can't grow. And so I approached them with, sort of the typical, I have a background in sales and marketing, so it was asking all the questions that you would expect someone to ask. One thing we identified, which they had already seen, was they had a lot of trouble getting repeat business. So in 1 year, they would have a great, a premier list of clients, but in the next year, they would have a very different list of clients, not the same as in year one. And in year three, their list of clients looked very different from years 2 and year 1. They just had trouble retaining clients. So I continued to look, and all the things that I thought might have been the problem. Is it their fees? Is it the way they communicate? Is it the way that they deliver the work? It's too hard for people to embrace. Whatever it is it too controversial? Nothing seemed to explain what was happening. So I finally said, how about we just have you describe for me? Just let's sit down and have a conversation and describe for me the process from the very beginning of your sales process when you meet a prospective client for the first time, all the way through the time that you aren't in a relationship with them anymore. What's that look like? And so as they were doing that, they got to one point where they said, and so then after we deliver the gig, and I said, stop, wait a second, what did you just say? They said, well, after we deliver the gig, and I said, okay, that word gig, that's a really interesting word. Because to me, I know it comes from, storytelling and performing, like you have a background, but it also has sort of a short-term context to it. You do a gig, you do the show, and then you move on to the next town. And so I wonder if that word you're using might actually be forcing you or causing you to think of your client relationships in a more short-term way. And so let's do an experiment. I'm going to forbid you, if you'll agree, I forbid you from ever using the word gig again to describe your client relationships or anything about it. And what I'd ask you to do is to find a word that represents a long-term relationship. What would that be for you? And they said, we like the word engagement. Okay, perfect. From now on, whenever you describe any part of your client relationship, you're talking about an engagement. Let's see what happens. We really didn't make any other changes, and within a year, their business had almost doubled in size. Now, I'm not telling you this story to tell you how smart I am. Really, the reason I was able to do this was for 2 reasons. One, I wasn't them. So I didn't share their blind spots. I had my own blind spots, but I didn't have theirs. So I could see things about them that they couldn't see. And the second was that I was looking through this whole issue the whole time through a lens or a framework, which is what I share with every one of my students who are studying with me, and I want to share with you today to help you see the world in a different way. So as I begin to share this with you, I need to preface it with a statement a quote by George Box that if you've worked with me before, you've heard me say, and you'll probably hear me say this in other videos, which is all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is a framework, a model that I'm going to share with you that, there's none of us can be so sophisticated, I don't believe, that we could come up with a framework that explains everything in the world. But there are some that are in certain situations are really useful. And this framework is really useful when you're trying to create a transformation, when you're not just trying to take people from here to here, but when you're wanting to go from here way over there, like a very different business result or a very different way to get there. This is really effective. I call it the transformational framework, or making transformational change, because that's what we're going for, not incremental. And sometimes I call it the accelerated learning framework, because in the process of doing this, you or your team or your organization also get much better at learning faster. And I believe that learning is the ultimate competitive advantage. In a world that's constantly changing, the people, the teams that learn the most effectively on the things that matter the most quickly are going to be the ones who stay ahead of the change and who stay ahead of their competitors. So it's this framework is 3 simple words that make a sentence. And so I'm going to break them down for you one at a time, and my guess is that you're going to understand this. And having the Acme example as reference will make all of this make a lot more sense more quickly for you, so that you can begin to apply it. So the first word of this 3-word sentence, of this 3-word model, is reality. And as I begin to share this, I just want to reference my sources for this. I learned a version of this that I've adapted from one of my teachers, a man named Julio Olaya. And I know that at least one of his sources was a man named Chris Argyris, a professor at Harvard in their business school. So reality is our first word. And reality represents the way you and I experience the world. There's the world, and then there's the way we experience the world, and that's through some filter or some worldview or some mental model. It's if we had 100 people all experience the same thing, we would get 100 different experiences of it, not one, even though there was only one thing or one event that we were experiencing. And that's because each of us has a unique reality. Now, your reality can be composed of all sorts of different things. It's based on where you grew up. What's your socioeconomic background? What was your religion? What part of the world are you from? What generation did you grow up in? What's your age? What's your birth order? Where did you work? What's your education in? Where did you get your education? Who have your bosses been? What were they like? Were your parents married or divorced? When did they get married or divorced? All sorts of things. Sexual orientation. It creates this unique reality that only you have. Now, people in your family versus the family across the street, your reality is probably going to look more like your own family's reality than the people across the street. People in your company or people on your team, if you're in finance versus sales, the people you collect with often will probably share more parts of a reality than somebody over there. So organizations or groups have realities as well. Days of the week have realities. Monday morning versus Friday afternoon. Cities have different realities. So your reality, though, is going to be unique to you. And this matters a lot, but most of us don't walk around saying, well, this is my reality and that's your reality. We assume that the way we see or experience the world is the way the world is. And so one of the key insights is that's not true. When I'm saying to you, you're hearing in a particular way, no matter how many hundreds or thousands of people are watching this, they're going to be that many different interpretations or different listenings of what it is that I'm saying, because everybody has a different reality. So from that reality, we're going to build this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this dotted line, which is this imaginary line that represents anything below the line are the things that are intangible, difficult to see or touch. You can talk about them, but they're just those intangible things. Above the line are the things that you can see, that you can touch, that are more visible, maybe even measurable. So that's just one little piece of this that will be useful. So our reality builds to something else. Based on our reality, we then make moves. Actions that you take, things that you do, words that you'll say, okay? But based on your reality, and I'm sorry that the word moves is smaller, it's not meant to be, reality is actually going to drive the moves that are available to you. And let's just imagine that there are infinite moves that any one of us could make in a particular situation. But based on our reality, we're going to narrow that list down to a more finite list. So you'll have some moves that you can make along the way, but your list is going to be finite. And the way you get there is because you make some conscious choices. You say, oh, I wouldn't do that. That looks unethical. That costs too much money. That doesn't look like fun. That one just tastes bad. I won't eat it. Whatever it is, I don't like that person. Based on your reality, you will say yes to some moves and no to others. But bring another person in, look at the same situation, and their list, based on a different reality, will look very different. To them, maybe it's not unethical. To them, maybe it's not too costly. To them, wow, that looks delicious. I'll eat it. Or that looks like fun. Let's do it. And so we all have a different list based on our different realities of the moves that we can make. Now, you're smart. So you have a long list that's available to you, but it's not infinite anymore. And another way it goes from infinite to finite is that you and I, we don't think about it, but our realities have blind spots to them. I know mine do. And certainly there are things for you. In that moment that I helped Acme, what was happening was I had different blind spots than they did. And I was able to catch that word, that assumption, their reality. The word gig wasn't the problem. The word gig represented a reality that they carried about how you engage. And it was a very short-term reality that they hadn't realized they had carried into business development. So my different blind spots, I saw into their blind spots, and I was able to help them do something else, which included making a different move. But it was very much about forcing them into or at least not forcing, inviting them into, it was very much about inviting them into a new reality to try on, to see if it could work. So this is how it works then. Your reality causes you to take certain moves or gives you the option of taking certain moves, and then that produces results. And so now we have the three-word sentence: reality, moves, results. Based on your reality, you will make some moves, not make other moves, and from those moves, you will produce results. If it's at work, that's what you get paid to do. If it's other places in your life, you still like to have results because you tell yourself, if I get these results, I'll be happier, I'll be whatever. So we aim for results. So once you produce those results, if the results that you're producing are fine for you, there's no need to make any change. So at some point, you or someone else is going to look at these results and say, yeah, that doesn't work for me anymore. It could be a customer, it could be yourself. From your reality, you look at your own results. It could be a neighbor, a friend, a spouse, the police, whoever. They say, yeah, that's not working for me anymore, and we need a new result. So it's usually not a problem because you're a smart person with a lot of choices. So what you're going to do is you're going to come back, that's an arrow, to the word moves, and you're going to make a different move. The first thing that most of us do is we actually make the same move, we just do more of it. So you work longer hours, you add people to the team, and hopefully that works. Many times it does. But if that doesn't work, it's no problem because you've got a list of moves that you can make here. So you could try a new move that was already available to you. Maybe it costs more, it took more time, or you weren't as familiar with it. So you start to do it, and or instead of or in addition to what you were doing before. And usually you just find some combination of these moves that are already on your list, and you're able to produce the results that they asked for. No problem, everything's fine. And there will be a moment in time when you have tried every single move in every possible combination, and you've worked the maximum number of hours possible, and you're still not producing the result that you want. And the interesting thing is, this is where a lot of people get stuck. I mentioned Chris Argyris from Harvard. He wrote an article probably 30 years ago called Teaching Smart People to Learn. Because you're so smart, the more likely it is that you'll get stuck in this place when you've exhausted every move. Because you're used to, this always works for me, so what else do I need to do? And he said teaching smart people to learn was different. Because they've had so much success, they're not familiar with the other move that's available, that you can obviously see where I'm headed with this. But it's the other move to make is to not just revise the moves, but to come all the way down and start to develop a new reality. Well, how do you do that? Because most of us don't walk around and say, this is my reality. We say, this is the way the world works. So we'll talk about the how in just a second. I'll give you some abbreviated ideas on that so that you can get started. But let's just talk about what that means. If I shift my reality, if, like we did with Acme, their reality went to short-term relationships to longer-term relationships, and that helped them take different moves that they hadn't thought of before. Like if we're in this for the long term, how would we set things up at the beginning? How would we manage the process throughout? How would we end that particular event so that it sets us up to continue even further? So their moves became different based on a different reality. And that's what we're looking to do, just sort of expand that reality or shift your reality in a way that most people, and by the way, it's not throw out the old reality, bring in a whole new reality. It's usually what I call microsurgery. You keep most of it, but you identify, like we did with them, gig, long term. We did microsurgery. 99.9% of what they were doing stayed the same, but we made that critical shift that an outside pair of eyes was able to catch easier than they were for themselves, because when it comes to reality, the eye cannot see the eye. The eye cannot see the eye. It's an old saying that you probably heard. So they couldn't see their own eye, but I was able to help them see a possibility of a new reality that then led them to that. So that's what the goal is. When you've exhausted these efforts, many times it's we need to come back and look at the reality and see how that can shift. And when you do that effectively, when you do that microsurgery in the right places, what begins to happen is your list of moves begins to shift. And some of the old ones may have fall off the list, but you have a new list of possible moves that now when you try those, you can produce different results. So that's simply put, that's the critical foundational element of this. When you start to see the world through this way, it can be really effective. But why would you want to? Because for most people, the majority, here I'm going to use it again, 99.9% of your life is lived effectively in this loop. So most people, they don't even feel the need. Or, as Chris Argyris says, they've never had to develop the move to come and do this. That's why sometimes having an outsider is helpful to do that. That's you as a leader coach catalyst will help people see, to imagine, to think of, to feel, experience a whole new world that they hadn't even believed was possible. In fact, maybe they thought it was impossible before. That'll be your job, so that then they can make the moves that were off the list before, so that they can produce those results. But reality is an intangible thing, so we'll talk about that. How do you change that? But let me just represent then, the majority of where we live our lives is in this loop, and I call this loop the incremental loop. Super effective, really valuable. You and I live most of our lives here. Then this is obviously going to be the transformational loop. Not better or worse, but if you're in that place where you need to be a leader, coach, catalyst, and really you see a very, very different future as possible or a different way to get there, you need to be able to not only do this for yourself, you're probably already living in a different reality. That's why you can see something different that other people can't see. But you're going to need to help people share enough of this reality with you to be able to have that transformational change, which then, again, we come back to accelerated learning. How do you get them to move a big distance fairly quickly? That's the essence of the model. I'm going to give you just a couple of ideas before I send you off to really go to apply this on how you would put this to work for yourself. So I'm talking about helping you change someone's reality, but reality is this thing that lives below the line. It's completely invisible and intangible, and you can't touch it. So how are you going to know what someone's reality is? Actually, they'll give you all sorts of information to help you know what this is as you begin to develop the eyes for it and the ears for it and just the sensibility for it. It's what I was doing when I was working with Acme. It was what I was listening for. In their instance, it was a word, but the word represented the way that they experience the world. So let me just give you some ideas to think about. First, at the high level, what you're going to be listening for is what are the stories people tell you about the world, about what's possible, about what can and can't be done, about what they like and don't like. They'll tell you. They won't call it a story. They're just going to be telling stories as if this is how it is. And one of the ways to know, one little thing to listen for, that somebody's about to tell you a story is whatever follows the word because. This is happening because, and because is going to tell you, is going to be speaking, it's going to be describing to you their reality. And what is a story? A story is a combination of words on a page that evoke emotion and that create action. And so let's think about those. So when you're listening for the stories, what's the mood that they're in? Are they happy about it? Are they angry about it? Depending on what mood you are, the mood really colors your reality. Think about when you're in a joyful mood and or you're in a confident mood and something breaks or goes wrong. What do you do? What's the move that you take? What are the thoughts that you have? And what results can you produce? Versus when you're really discouraged or you're angry and the very same thing happens and goes wrong, well, what moves are you going to take from that mood? So your mood definitely colors the reality in a person's mood. And if people are in a mood of discouragement, they can have all the talent and desire in the world, but they're not going to have the moves available to them. They took them off the table for themselves. So that's one thing. And when you listen to their stories, listen for their moods. Another thing you can listen to when they're telling their stories is what Professor James Clausen from the University of Virginia calls VABES, VABES. It's an acronym for values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. Those are things that are definitely compose a person's reality. Now you may say, well, how do I know what their values, how do I know what their VABES are? Well, one way is to listen to when they're experiencing the world and telling their story, what really makes them angry, what really pisses them off. That's because the world or someone has violated one of their VABES. And what delights them? Well, that's when the world is acting in accordance with their VABES. So that's another thing to just listen for, what's working or not working for them, and they'll start to reveal for you what their values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations are in case you need to help them adjust it. And then the last thing is actions. So what are the, actions is also a part of that story. So what are the things that they're saying? What are the actions that they take or that they refuse to take? Those are also going to help you understand their story. Their story is just their way they sort of verbally and emotionally and through action represent their reality. So listen for that. Start to pay attention to the stories people tell you and listen for their moods, their actions, and the way they think, and their the values that they hold, the way they take in the world. That will help you understand what their filters are, which we're today calling reality. You can also call the word reality mental model or worldview or whatever. I like the word reality because it's more all-encompassing. It's not just mental. There's an emotional piece to it. There is an action piece of it. Even the way you stand, the way you think about how you will experience the world if you're tired, you didn't get any sleep last night because your baby kept you up all night, versus I got a full night's rest and I'm feeling energized. I'm feeling overweight. I'm feeling fit. You're going to experience the world. The world doesn't change. Your experience of the world changes because your reality is different. So that's one. Now, what do you do? How do you help a person change their reality once you know it? By the way, you don't always have to have it identified. Sometimes you can just go about helping them change it. But I found usually it's helpful for me because then when you start to describe it to them, you're helping them understand their reality isn't just necessarily the way the world is. Ooh, there's another option because now you're showing me what I'm doing and the impact it's having on my moves, the impact it's having on my results. So the last thing is, how do you help someone change their reality so that their moves can shift, so that their reality can shift? Well, some of it's going to be the same. You're going to need to help them tell a new story. One way to do that is for you to tell your story, for you to tell your version of the story, as long as it's not miles and miles away, and you can share a story of success, especially of how it's worked before or how you've seen someone else do it or how you envision it happening. If they can start to connect to that, our brains actually bring information in through story. If you just give somebody data, they actually have to put it into a story, usually their pre-existing story based on the reality, and then that's how they take it in. But if your information, your data that you're giving them doesn't fit into their pre-existing story, it just bounces. It doesn't go in. So you may have to tell a new story. That's a really effective way to do it. If you know great catalysts in the world, they're the ones who tell amazing stories to bring to life possibilities in people's minds and in their hearts that they hadn't seen before. You can do that as a leader, as a coach, as a catalyst. Another thing is to help them feel safe, to create safety. People talk about psychological safety. Look, changing your reality for a lot of people, changing your values, changing your stories, changing your mood about something can feel really risky. It's like changing my whole world. You're not telling me to change my reality. You're trying to, you're telling me that's the way the world is, and you want me to change that? So you need to help them feel safe enough, and not just, yell at them or force them into something, or try and get them to take too big a step at a time. And one way you can create that safety is by listening to understand. And you'll actually, when you start to see into their reality, you'll learn some things that you didn't realize were true. So when they start to experience, oh, you actually see my reality, or at least part of it, you're respecting it, they'll feel more safe. And then you can actually get them to the point of taking some baby steps to make some changes. So eventually you may actually say, let's try these small moves. But they're different moves than you've taken before. And if you do them over and over and over, that's another way into changing the reality. It doesn't have to just be conversation, it can be through action. In fact, I've worked with a number of companies who have introduced, they've gone from traditional managing of a process to introducing agile thinking. And it's, they don't hand you a, a handbook and say, okay, this is how you must do it. This is the way you must think. This is how you must have your reality. What they have you do is they have you start attending a different type of meeting called a stand-up. And they introduce ideas like Pareto charts or Kanbans and different ways, different actions, different moves that you can make. And at first they feel really awkward and weird, but they ask you to go along, and so you go along because they're paying you to do that. But over time, as you repeat those moves over and over, if you strategically pick the right moves, eventually their reality changes so much so that if 6 or 8 or 3 months later you ask them to go back to the old way, they'd say, well, why would I do that? This is working so much better. You've actually, through helping them strategically pick specific moves, you can change their reality. So reality moves results. It's for transformation, it's for accelerated learning. If you want to make a change this much, you probably don't need this. My clients are the ones who are the catalysts. So that's why this is so effective. This is running in the background all the time for me, and I want to help you start to have it running in the background for you so that when you have a moment where there's a transformation possible and you're the catalyst of it, or even if you are the coach of it and you're not directly involved in the leading of it, you know how to help shift, 1 to thousands of people to build a new reality that leads to new moves that helps them produce transformationally different results. I can't wait to hear how you apply this or where you get stuck applying it, and give me your questions. Here's my suggestion. Earmark this. Come back and watch it in a month after practicing, and watch it in another month and another month. And what's going to happen is your reality related to this is going to continue to change, and you're going to hear something brand new. You're never the same learner twice when you take this path. You'll be a completely different learner, and even though it's the exact same video, you'll see it in a different way, and you'll continue to build your own skills. So please come back and watch this. Share this with anybody who you know is a catalyst that needs to or wants to transform things, and I'll see you in the next video.